Philadelphia is steep in broadcast history. From the early pioneering days of broadcasting in the 1920s to today, Philadelphia has always been at the forefront. The Delaware Valley has been home to some of the best local programming in the country, starting with the early soap operas and children's shows to pioneering the best news formats in the country. Much of it all began right here. From radio announcers to television personalities, cameramen to directors, these were the broadcasters that burned up the airwaves. These were the pioneers of Philadelphia broadcasting.
Hi, and welcome once again to Pioneers of Philadelphia Broadcasting. I'm Mike Strug. I'm happy to see you with us, and especially happy to see this young woman, Lisa Thomas Laury, one of the most distinguished anchors in Philadelphia television history. It's so good to see you. And I guess I have to start. You retired last year.
Right.
How are you feeling? We all know, and we'll talk further about your illness,
Sure.
but how are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling good, Mike. Yeah, it's been a long journey, but the last 2 or 3 months have been really good. I've gotten my strength back, just finished a book, and I have to say, life is good. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we'll get into your illness. I think people want to know what happened with that.
Right.
It's become an important part of your life. Everybody has kind of followed that. Let me ask for openers, however, how are you dealing with retirement? Are you happy or?
Yeah, it was time. It was time. I'm at peace with retirement. I knew when I discovered that my disease return, that was probably going to be the last chapter for me in my career, at least this career. Mm-hmm. So it's been a little difficult the prior year because a bone marrow transplant can really, really wipe you out.
I was going to delay talking about it, but I guess we can't. It is just there. It is, it's the elephant in the room.
Yes.
Okay, so you came to work, and let me confess here, that I worked at Channel 6, where you worked for 38 years.
Yeah.
I worked there from 1966 to 78. Then I went over to Channel 3 for 10 years and ended up almost 20 years at Channel 10. We passed each other in the night. You arrived in 1978, and just as I was leaving. Okay. Mm-hmm. You had this wonderful career, but it was interrupted by an autoimmune disease. Can you explain what that is so people can begin to identify with what you've been going through?
Well, actually, it wasn't an autoimmune disease. It was thought to be an autoimmune disease. And what I learned in researching it was that the symptoms paralleled. There were many symptoms of my disease that mimicked several autoimmune diseases, and I learned to distinguish between the two. But I also found out that a lot of people go through what I go through and don't really have the resources all the time to make the diagnosis or to get to the right doctor.
The diagnosis is POEM or?
POEMS syndrome. Yes. Each letter stands for a symptom of the disease.
P-O-E-M.
Yeah, P-O-E-M-S.
S.
I don't know if you want me to go through it all, but it's a polyneuropathy, organomegaly, enlarged organs. The E is for the endocrine system is impacted. The M is monoclonal gammopathy. That's something in the blood. That's what really distinguishes it from an autoimmune disease. And S, changes in your skin. I started out with 3 of the symptoms, ended up with all 5 before I was accurately diagnosed.
Do they know what causes that, or?
It's the whole epidemiology. They don't like autoimmune diseases. They don't know exactly what causes it. So I was told by some doctors it could have been viral. In the book, I bring up the book, but anyway, I wrote a book, and I even explored the fact that I grew up in a small industrial town. They had many, many chemical plants. And I wondered if perhaps something living close to a chemical plant could have led to that years later. But to answer your question, they think anything is possible. It's like cancer, you don't know.
Yeah, I seem to recall that when you first took a leave of absence, one of the things I seem to recall was that you said it felt as if you had stones in the bottom of your shoes, that your feet would hurt. I mean, that's almost unimaginable for those of us. So you didn't have to be walking, and you would feel that discomfort.
You know, yeah, it started at the most distal points of my body. It started in my toes and feet. I thought initially that I might have calluses on my feet. It started sort of right in the ball of my foot and my toes.
What year was that?
That would have been 2001 when I first had symptoms. And again, that's why they thought it wasn't a blood disease, but rather an autoimmune disease. The polyneuropathy was very closely associated with CIDP. And my disease, which is extremely rare, is most often mistaken for CIDP, which is chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy.
It sounds as if you've just come out of medical school. You really are so familiar with these names.
Yeah, well, I went 2.5 years misdiagnosed. And it's funny because the first doctor I went to was a neurologist because my symptoms involved the neurological part of my body. And we went to a doctor who had been my husband's mentor in medical school. He got it right. He happened to be leaving to go to Atlanta to Morehouse College to do research. He passed me on to 2 other doctors. They dismissed his diagnosis.
Oh my.
And I was treated for the wrong disease thereafter for 2.5 years until I got to the Mayo Clinic.
And that was the time where you were on a leave of absence. There was a long period of time.
You know, I worked for about 8 months with the symptoms until I realized that I really needed to take the time. Well, it paralyzed my vocal cord. That's when I left. I couldn't project my voice. So I did leave after that. But you know what I've found, Mike, everybody's got something they deal with. You deal with it, and then you do whatever you can to get to the bottom and get the answers and solutions.
And finally, after your retirement, the bone marrow transplant?
I had 2.
2.
I had, when I finally got the correct diagnosis, I had one in 2004, and I went, let's see, what's that, 11 years? Wow. Actually, the disease resurfaced about 9 years later. And by that time, they had more treatments, better medicines, and I tried those first until it was recommended that I get another bone marrow transplant. Okay. Yeah, I hate to start with the medical.
I know. Okay.
There's so much else about my...
Yeah, let's talk about your career.
Okay.
The quote I love anytime you look up your name deals with Oprah and how you beat her out for the job at Channel 6. Tell that story.
You know, that came to light at my retirement party.
Oh, is that right?
I had never really, I was considered the Oprah reporter at Channel 6 because we crossed paths back in 1976 when I was being interviewed for a job at Nashville, WTVF, and Oprah was from Nashville, Tennessee, had been working at this station and was about to go to Baltimore to take a job. I came in for the interview, she and I connected, and we followed each other's careers. And after I left Nashville, I came to Philadelphia and found out that she had been interviewing for the same position and was turned down. And I got the job. So we sort of kept that between us. And when she sent a video tribute for my retirement party, she mentioned it in a very joking, jovial way. That we met each other, and I wanted to come to Philly, but they didn't want me. They wanted you.
So she might have ended up working with Mark Howard and
I think she would have gone. She wanted to come to Philadelphia.
Yeah, and then you would have had the Oprah show.
Maybe. Wouldn't that be great?
Okay. And we'd call it the Lisa Thomas show.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But she, it's funny because back then, it was something about Oprah. Even then, I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in the hotel room. She was anchoring a solo newscast, the weekend, Sunday evening news, solo, I think I mentioned. And was a woman and an African-American woman, a black woman. And she was young. And I remember being mesmerized because she had this presence and this voice. And I was so thrilled to meet her the next day because I said, wow, you know, there weren't that many of us, you know, double minorities in those days. And just to connect, she invited me over that night to stay at her apartment before I left the next day. And we kept in touch. And
you didn't get the job in Nashville?
I did.
Oh, you did get it.
I went to Nashville for 2 years.
Oh, okay.
And she got the job in Baltimore. And but she told me that first night I met her, because she said, so what do you want to do? And I said, you know, I want to go to Philly and maybe New York one day, but I want to get married and have a family. And she didn't. She said, you know, I'm not really into the marriage thing. I don't think I'll be doing that. And she didn't say it, you know, she wasn't cocky, but she was extremely confident. And I think even then she knew she was prepared for greatness. I think there was something in her. And so when I would go up to interview her in Chicago, we would always talk about that. We'd sort of chuckle, the fact that fate intervenes sometimes and you do what you're meant to do.
So here you are in Philadelphia at what then was the #1 station.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
And,
right after Larry Kane left.
Yeah, and it was a pretty exciting time. Talk about that. What was it like to come into Philadelphia and work at Channel 6?
You know, it was a really new adventure for me because before then I had really not anchored. I had done, in fact, I was surprised that I was hired for an anchor position because I'd only done morning cut-ins, been on the anchor desk for 5 minutes at a time. And mostly was a reporter. I had been an education reporter in Nashville. And you know, when I think of my arrival at Channel 6, I think of Jim O'Brien.
Sure.
Because he saved me.
How so?
You know, I was very new. I was such a neophyte. I was very green at the anchor desk, and he took me under his wing. And you know, they didn't like my hair. They didn't like my West Virginia twang. You know, they had changed my name because I was Lisa Howard. They said, you can't come here and work as Lisa Howard because we have a Mark Howard. They didn't want people to be confused. So I changed my name to Lisa Thomas. 6 months later, a young man from Buffalo, Dave Thomas, was hired. And they said, Dave, we already have a Lisa Thomas. You can't, you know, you can't do this. You need to pick another name. So Dave became Dave Roberts. But legally, it was Dave Boreanaz, so it was a big, confusing name.
Right.
Yeah. So I just felt like I was being pulled in all directions. They changed sent me across the street. I think it was Mark Tannenbaum was the hair salon, and he thinned my hair, and I got the anchor bob, and a voice coach from Temple. I remember her name, Julia Wing. She came and taught me how to have a universal dialect, and I think Jim just saw that there was some tension there, and I was so aware of I was making mistakes on the air with pronunciations of Moya Mensing and Conshohocken, and so about twice a week I would.
If you can't say only, people know
only or only.
Yeah.
Right. And so Jim took me under his wing, and I can't even repeat what he initially said to me. He said, blank them, just focus. You know, they're screwing with your head. Just focus on what you're doing. You're really good at it, and they're making you worry too much. And he helped me relax. And you know, one day I brought in a list of names and districts and phrases, and he practiced with me, you know, and helped me prepare for it. And I became much more relaxed and confident. And I think they always liked my reporting. And I began to thrive and love the city and do very well. But I'm telling you, if it hadn't been for Jim O'Brien, I don't know.
He was truly special.
There
is no question about that.
He was very special.
And despite the many years that I worked at the other stations in town, there was something special, and I don't know if it still exists, but there was something special about Channel 6 back then.
Oh, yeah.
What I keep saying is we were all kids.
Yeah.
We were all in our 20s, and we were learning.
Yeah.
By the way, just as an aside on this, when you got here, they were #1.
Right.
When I started,
Number
There were only
3?
3 stations in town, but we were number 4 behind Wee Willie Weber and his cartoons. You know,
I remember hearing about that.
you know,
sure.
and then Action News started, and as I say, we were all kids, and we were a team. We were really, you know,
Right.
so you.
Yeah,
and
I
you
remember hearing
Yeah.
that Channel 6 had been number 4, and that the big successful anchor team was Mort Krim and Jessica Savage.
Right.
And so when they left, and Jim Gardner went from the noon news to the 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news. We had become number 1. But you know what? I think that the special thing about Channel 6 was the way Larry Pollock ran the show. And the fact that it was a Cap City's nice mom and pop station. And I think they really cared about people. And I think the employees, they felt that. You know, I remember thinking that, you know, coming from West Virginia, Nashville, and before that I worked at Oklahoma City. I thought I was coming to the big city. I didn't know it was a big town, you know. I thought I was coming to like a New York. But what I came to learn that, you know, it wasn't this big city operation. In fact, it was Jim O'Brien who convinced me not to go on to New York and that I would have a special career if I'd stayed in Philadelphia. But Larry Pollock was concerned about me being able to buy a house when I got married, and do you need an attorney to look things over for you? I didn't expect that type of treatment or concern or help. Bob Feldman, who used to take a ruler and measure each side of my hair because my hair was too thick, became like an uncle to me, you know, because he did that because, you know, he thought I had too much hair. I didn't agree, but they really were concerned and cared and wanted you to succeed. And once I realized that, I began to thrive, and I felt like, you know, this is a place I could stay.
It appears from the outside, I believe, and I mean, I've kind of been inside, but that what seems to work for Channel 6 is a feeling that it's family, that it's that everybody knows each other. They've been there for years and years. So, you know, I can name names too. Matt O'Donnell worked out on the street with me. I don't know, 30 years ago.
And at that time, of course, now you didn't see reporters staying at one station that long. You know, there was that revolving door where you were at a station for 2 years and you'd move on. And there was so much longevity with employees who worked there. You know, I was there for 38 years, but Dave Roberts has also been there 38 years before he retired.
Knowing I was going to do this, I started going over and thinking in my head, well, and I'm trying not to be critical, the natural progression is we get older and we are replaced. It doesn't matter whether you're on television or doctors or lawyers or postmen eventually, but it seems to happen more slowly. So when I look at some of the other channels, I recognize a handful of people. I come over there and you know, and I can start certainly with Jim Gardner, but then John Rollins or Vern Odom or you know, all the names, Dan Cuellar, people I've known for years are
Kathy
still
Gandolfo.
there. Oh, Kathy, I still stay in touch with Kathy occasionally.
Having just recently left, you know, but still having a connection to the station. And now you see the new wave coming in, and I'm not talking about the real young reporters that come in, but Monica Malpass, Rick Williams, you know, they've been there going on 20 years, 20-some years, and they still have who knows how many years to go.
Yeah. If it weren't for your illness, would you still be working, do you think? Would you still like to be there?
Yeah, I would have. Mark Howard used to tell me, he said, you know, I think you could work as long as you want. He said, I can see you being like, there was a woman reporter or anchor down in Florida who was almost 70, who was still working. I can't think of her name now, but he says, you could be her. I think if you wanted to, you'd be 75 years and still working on the air here. And yeah, sure, I thought that I might. I would not have retired quite as early. I would have gone at least to 65. And I turned 63 this summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
The phrase I often use, and I've stolen it from somewhere on the internet, is I don't miss the rat race, but I miss the rats.
Right.
And
Exactly. I miss the people.
It-
You know, I still stay in touch. I was surprised you had mentioned someone got married, but not too much gets by me because I have contacts on camera and off camera. You know, people, friends, like you say, family members who will email me or text me and say, did you know such and such is doing this? I just got a text the other day from Darla. She's one of the web directors, Darla Jax Robinson, and she was telling me that Rebecca Campbell, who was our president of the Eastern Division, ABC, has been promoted to international president and chairman. She's going to be in London, based in London, handling all the Mideast, Africa, Disney, properties.
I sometimes wonder how you explain the ongoing success of Channel 6. They've been #1. You're saying in '78, but I recall long before that. I have pictures of us at a dinner with the original news director of Action News, Mel Campman.
Right.
And we were marking the first time we were #1. It may have only been for one show.
Right.
But it was somewhere early in the '70s, as I recall.
Right. I think 72, 73, I remember.
Yeah, and so we're talking 40 years, something like that. My math isn't that good. That's why was in television. But
And that has been unheard of.
yeah.
But
How do you explain it? I have my theory. What's your
You have your
theory of their
theory?
success?
I guess my theory is that people in general, and especially viewers in the Delaware Valley, don't want a lot of change. And we have stayed the same. We have, not just with the people, but forever. I can remember when some of the competing stations started to go with this high-tech meteorology. We're there now. But we had Jim O'Brien, and he had his good guys and his bad guys and his weather map and his pointer, and we didn't go that route. We didn't go into the flash and the drama nearly as quickly as some of the other stations, and I think that people felt comfortable seeing the same people that they came to love and respect and depend on, and the fact that we weren't pushing new stuff on them too fast.
I agree. The same people is the answer I always give.
Yeah.
That you get used to inviting people into your bedroom.
Yeah. It's an intimate scenario.
Yeah, and so you want to know they're the same people. And so Jim Gardner has been there since '77.
Right.
And Vernon and all these people I'd mentioned, and gradually, and Monica and Rick, and
sure.
gradually they bring in new people.
Right.
But it's very slow. It's
And the marketing strategy and the promotion is done very carefully and cleverly. Yeah. And you notice with even the young people, some have left. I can think of two right away who've left, but they've gone to ABC Network. Right. So you still see them on the same station. But a lot of the young people, the Alicia Vittorelli and Sarah Bloomquist, and who's Melissa McGee, they've all been there 6, 7 years now. It's not like
I'm sorry. No, Sarah's been there
12, 15?
at least.
Right. Sarah's
somewhere.
she's been there.
In the early 2000s.
So it looks like this is just going to be cyclical, and it's going to repeat itself again.
The other thing I've noted, and I'll try and do this as nicely as I can, they tend to hire people who look a little bit like the people they're replacing, if that makes any sense
That's
to
interesting.
you. And so
I hadn't thought about it that way.
I find that, and forgive me for not knowing their names exactly, the medical reporter
Allie Gorman.
replaced,
Who did she replace? Anita Brickman?
who went to Washington.
Yeah.
There was a striking similarity, I thought, in their appearance. Maybe I'm wrong, but I saw
Well,
that.
it's funny because physically, Anita Brickman is taller than me.
Yeah.
She's 5'11".
Yeah.
Allie's a petite little thing. But you're right.
And
the blonde hair, the shape of the face.
Yeah.
So what our viewers see is it can be similar.
I am friendly with Nydia Hahn, have been for years, since before she came to work.
She's great. She's
And
fabulous.
she replaced, was it Lucy?
Who did Nydia place? I'm trying to think.
It was Asian American woman. I cannot remember her name.
I can't remember either. I'm trying to remember. Who
I would
Lydia
suggest that Jim Gardner and Larry Kane do not look that much different, that they
Right.
have that same appearance. And I just marvel at their ability to find people.
You know, it's interesting you say that, Mike, because I hadn't thought of it that way, but I'm immediately thinking of Brian Taft as a possible young Jim Gardner.
You may have a better sense of this than I, but you know, is it Brian? Is it Matt?
Right. Matt O'Donnell. There's that similar.
Whoever it is, you know, it's not somebody from Idaho.
Right.
Who's going to be brought in when
Right.
Jim finally decides that he's had
And
enough.
he's going to go. That is. I'm looking forward to not Jim leave. I'm not looking forward to him leaving, but I'm looking forward to see who replaces him.
How do they replace him?
Because I don't know. It could be Rick Williams.
Look, one of the things that I know we all talked about in the business is when Jim died, when Jim O'Brien died.
Right.
The thought was, oh my goodness, because he was the appeal.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I think there was, within the station, I think there was definitely a concern that the ratings might slip. Mm-hmm. And just the opposite happened. Right. Just the opposite. So it is the people, but it's also the format. It's also us collectively more than us singularly.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Right.
There is a comfort level there.
Yeah.
There is no question.
There absolutely is.
Well, as you think back on your career, what's the best thing that happened, do you think? And maybe at the same time think about what was the worst thing that happened.
The best thing had to be, I mean, there's one story that stands out, but the best thing was just, I loved reporting. I always loved going out and meeting so many different people, and sometimes you know, hard news reporters, and I was both, you know, but sometimes hard news reporters don't like to do feature stories, and I love to do both. Rick Williams paid me a wonderful compliment when I left, when I retired, and he said that he hoped he would be able to go back and forth between reporting each as comfortably and as professionally as I did. And I did enjoy both. I loved covering the conventions, the political stuff, but I loved even more telling people stories and the challenge of going into a story that seemed like just a throwaway story. I remember 2 mailmen came to the house of someone in Southwest Philadelphia, and the man had an accident in the winter and was lying on his floor for 2 or 3 days. Oh. The mailman didn't just put the mail in the slot. He wanted to hear the man's voice. They had made a connection over the years. He was concerned about him, and he heard him moan out. And he went and got his backup mail guy, and they got into the house and saved this man. Got him to a hospital. I think one of the mailmen even had him come to his home for a while. And to me, that was a story, it was just a heartwarming story, something that was a challenge to be able to tell it the way it happened. And so I really always loved feature stories. When I came back from my illness, that's what I wanted to do, primarily. I didn't want to cover the murders and the fires and that all over again. I wanted to cover ordinary people doing unique things, or people overcoming obstacles in their lives the way I had. So I think of all those wonderful stories that I got to tell, but the one story that stands out was going to London. You know, I covered the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana, and it was quite an adventure. Cheryl Fair was an executive producer then, and Bob Pruitt, photographer, and
both of whom I worked with, by the way.
Many times.
And Cheryl is now the general manager out in California.
And
KABC.
San Francisco.
Yeah, or San Francisco.
Is it San Francisco or LA?
I think it's LA.
LA. It's in LA. But anyway, I just remembered the Asian reporter that Kristen was in San Francisco that you thought Nydia may have been placed. I remember her now. Anyway, I can't remember.
Yes.
Kristen Z?
Kristen Z.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. She went to San Francisco.
Exactly.
Worked with her as well.
Yeah.
I worked with Thomas Edison.
But I remember that story so well, and I put this in the book. I was thinking at the time, why did they choose me to go to London? You know, it was such an honor and such an extraordinary opportunity. And we were covering a little story on our last day at a pub nearby. And there was a sign above the pub. You know, in London, in England, trucks are called lorries. And the sign said, Lisa Thomas Laury.
Oh my goodness.
And I looked up and I said, I was meant to be here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did you do a whole separate story on
Yes,
that?
of
There
course.
you go, of course. Hey,
So it was little things like that that happened all along the trip. It just worked out, you know.
well, and I think that was a special time and a special ability. I guess that's what I want to say, to recognize that all these stories have a human factor.
Exactly.
And to
Exactly.
recognize that human factor. I
Right.
want to talk about your book for a second. I don't know
Okay.
if we can go in tight on this. We're able to see it. In any event, tell us a little bit about the book. This is your story of you.
Yeah, that's my story. I guess that's my little memoir. I think I always knew that I was going to write a book, but I really thought it was just going to be something like a journal or a memoir for my family. When I first got sick, my mother and my husband, and I probably would have done it on my own, but perhaps not as soon, convinced me to take notes, make a journal, so that when I got better, I could go back and look how I handled this hardship. And so I did. It was very therapeutic to write back then. But I didn't do anything with it. You know, I started writing, I guess, 2003, when I actually left Channel 6. Who knew? At the time, I thought it may be permanently, but they always left the door open for me to come back. And so when I got sick again, I would dabble with it. I'd write a chapter. I may have written 3 chapters before I got sick again in 2012. Had another bone marrow transplant the year before I retired. And my sons kept saying, Mom, when are you going to write your book? When are you going to write your book? And I said, I don't know. I put it off. I procrastinated. And my youngest, Leland, said, Mom, you could help so many people. And when he said that, that's when it dawned on me that perhaps I could, because I thought about the paperwork involved with being sick, you know. I thought about just getting through all the red tape, how many doctors misdiagnosed me, what questions to ask, what questions to not ask. My husband was a doctor. We thought we asked all the right questions, yet I remained misdiagnosed for 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. So I said, there are certainly things that I learned along the way.
In pain for 2.5, and uncomfortable for 2.5 years.
Yeah,
It was
I was getting sicker and sicker. And, you know, I just thought there are things that I've learned, and maybe I could share that with another person going through something similar. So when I did decide to retire the year after my second bone marrow transplant, I couldn't do too much, you know. I had to get new vaccinations, and I was pretty much homebound for a while. And it was, like I said, very therapeutic to write. And once I got started, you know, telling my story and organizing it, I said, oh, I think I can do this. Because all I had heard was, it was exciting to get that first book. Yeah. But it's so different than writing for television. And that was a little intimidating to me.
Well, as a brother-in-law once said, well, you ought to write a movie or something. I said, I've never had a thought that runs more than 1.5 minutes. I'm grateful that you have thoughts that run into this book. It's delightful talking with you. It was delightful watching you.
Thank you.
You were a mainstay of Philadelphia television. I wish you the best and hope that the future is bright and healthy for you.
Oh, thank you. And likewise, I loved meeting you on the street, seeing how you were going to handle the story.
Yeah, it's good to talk with you. Thank you very much for joining us. Join us again on Pioneers of Philadelphia Broadcasting. Take care.